In my childhood, when the world was full of mystery and excitement, I found myself scared of the dark, a fear not uncommon among children, but mine was unique. It was not the dark that frightened me, but the whispers. Whispers that seemed to come from shadows in my room at night. These whispers were not evil or threatening, but they were unfamiliar. They were the voices of strangers, and this unfamiliarity is what truly scared me. It was as though I was surrounded by ghosts, each with their own distinct voice, just like people do. I remember night after night I would wake up to these whispers. I would often try to explain this to my mother. I would tell her about the whispers, about the voices that sounded so different from each other. But to her, they were just bumps in the night, the typical material of childhood nightmares. To me, they were much more. They were my reality, a reality I could not escape. The fear would become so overwhelming that I had to find some place. The only place where I could find that was away from the whispers was being around my mother. On some of these nights, when the whispers would become too intense, too real, I would run to my mother's bed. It was there, in the safety of her presence, that I could feel safe enough to close my eyes again and sleep. But even then, the fear lingered, the whispers echoed, and I knew that the night was far from over. One particular night, around Christmas, the house was quiet with only the subtle noise of the heater running. I woke up needing to use the bathroom. As I stepped out into the hallway, the stairs leading down to the first floor were directly in my line of sight. This time, instead of the usual darkness, a strange red light caught my attention. It was like a spotlight illuminating the wall at the bottom of the stairs. The intensity of the red color was startling, yet mesmerizing. There was no logical explanation for it, no other source of light, just this lone red light. What was even more peculiar was that the light seemed to have a mind of its own. It moved, it danced, it played on the wall as if trying to communicate something. And then I heard it, a whisper, as clear as day, distinctly saying, "Look." The voice was different, not wicked, but unfamiliar, just like the ones I used to hear in the dark. In my young mind, the answer was obvious. It must be Santa Claus. Who else could it be? With Christmas just around the corner, I was convinced that Santa had made an early visit to check if I'd been good. The red light must be Rudolph's nose, I thought. The excitement bubbled up inside me, making my heart pound with joy. I was so thrilled that I began walking down the stairs. I was going to meet Santa. But as I descended, the light started to go away, slowly creeping off the wall and disappearing into the pitch blackness of the living room. As I ventured down the stairs, a different voice than the whispers commanded me to stop. It was a strong masculine voice, and it was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It wasn't my father's voice or a voice I could place to anyone I knew. It was unfamiliar and somewhat chilling. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding. The voice had been so clear, so commanding. I felt an immediate sense of dread, a gut instinct that told me to listen. The voice hadn't just suggested I stop, it had demanded it, with an authority that was impossible to ignore. Fear prickled at the back of my neck, and I turned around, my small feet padding softly on the staircase as I went back up to the safety of my room. The excitement of possibly meeting Santa had completely evaporated, replaced by a fear that was all too real. I didn't understand who had spoken, or where the voice had come from, but I knew I had to get away from it. The house was silent once again, the only sound being my own breaths. I wanted to look back to see if anything was following me, but I was too afraid. All I could do was move forward, up the stairs, towards safety. No sooner had I reached the top of the stairs, a loud crash echoed through the house, sending me running back to my mother's bed. The sound was deafening, like something heavy had been thrown. I jumped into my mother's bed, burrowing under the covers, hiding. The morning light revealed a scene of chaos that left us all confused. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating a scene that seemed to belong to a thriller movie rather than our tranquil home. The staircase, which used to have twinkling Christmas lights along the railing the night before, now lay bare. The lights had been tugged down to the bottom, some shattered into tiny pieces. The living room bore the brunt of the chaos. Our dry sink, a sturdy piece of furniture that had always hung on the wall, was now on the floor. It was as if it had been ripped from its place and flung across the room with a strength that was unsettling. The loud crash I had heard in the dead of the night was now explained, but the understanding did nothing to stop the fear. A look of confusion was etched on my parents' faces. My mother, with the strings of Christmas lights in her hand, looked around the room, her brows furrowed. My father was kneeling by the dry sink on the ground, examining the scene with a grim expression. "A home invasion," he murmured, but his voice was filled with doubt. But as we looked around, it was clear that this theory was wrong. The doors were locked from the inside, the windows untouched. There were no signs of a forced entry, no footprints, nothing that suggested there had been an intruder. Yet the evidence was there, right before our eyes. Something had happened. Then I saw it, a chilling detail that left me speechless. It was as if time had frozen for a moment, as I was drawn to the edge of the wooden dry sink that had fallen from the wall. There, etched into the polished surface, were 3 distinct indentations. The finish on the wood had been worn away, as if by an intense, forceful grip. They were not random or accidental. They were deliberate, tangible evidence of a presence, of something that had been there that night. Something that had the power to physically interact with its surroundings, to grip the dry sink with such force that it left its mark. I remember staring at the indentations, my mind racing to make sense of it all. This was no ordinary occurrence, no simple bump in the night. This was something more, something otherworldly. And it wasn't just the dry sink. It was as if something or someone had ripped the Christmas lights that my mother had hung, in a fit of rage or frustration. The fallen dry sink, the torn lights, the loud crash that had sent me sprinting back to the safety of my mother's bed. It all pointed to one undeniable truth. There had been something down there, at the bottom of the stairwell. Something that didn't want me to go into the darkness. I was too terrified to speak up or to admit that I knew something was down there that night. The words were trapped in my throat. I was just a child who had stumbled upon a secret, and so I kept silent. After that night, the whispers stopped. I'd grown accustomed to the whispers, the voices that seemed to emanate from the darkness. Now they were gone. The house felt different somehow. The air was lighter, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. The shadows no longer seemed to mock me with their silent whispers. The darkness, though still unsettling, was just darkness. The stairwell was no longer a place of dread and fear. However, the absence of the whispers didn't bring me the peace I thought it would. Instead, it left me with a feeling of unease, a nagging thought that the silence was merely a prelude to something else, something far more sinister. I would lie awake at night, my ears straining to catch any hint of the familiar whispers, my heart pounding in my chest. But they never came. The whispers, the voices, they were gone. As the years passed, the memory of the whispers and the events of that night receded into the background. They became nothing more than a childhood fear, a story I would tell at parties. Even as I laughed and shrugged it off, a part of me couldn't let go. The whispers might have stopped, but the fear lingered. It followed me into adulthood. It made me wary of the darkness, of shadowy staircases, and of the night itself. That incident occurred when I was just 7, and its impact has lasted to this day. In the safety of daylight, I can almost forget it. I can go about my day, live my life, laugh, work, and play. But when night falls, when the world is dark, it resurfaces. The fear, my fear, it comes back. Every time I stand at the top of a stairwell, I can't help but feel a chill run down my spine. I can't help but remember the red light, the masculine voice, the loud crash. I can't help but think about what could be lurking in the shadows, waiting for me. I try to shake off these thoughts. I try to convince myself that it's all in my head, that there are no monsters hiding in the dark, that there are no voices whispering in the silence. The fear refuses to be rationalized. It refuses to be silenced. I am 20 years old now. A lot has changed since that Christmas night. The fear is a part of me, a part of my story, a part of my identity.